Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: China has begun enforcing export controls on fentanyl precursors to the U.S. We break down Beijing's latest move to curb the flow of the deadly opioid. Tensions are flaring between Japan and China after a Chinese diplomat threatened to cut off the head of Japan's prime minister. Tokyo launched a strong protest, calling the remark unacceptable. And the U.S. ambassador to Japan weighs in on the situation. Beijing has just commissioned its third and most capable aircraft carrier. In an effort to compete with Washington's naval power, we bring you the details. Beijing is starting to crack down on fentanyl precursor exports to the U.S. China's Commerce Ministry says it's tightening control over exports of chemicals used to make the deadly synthetic opioid. The country added 13 new chemicals to its export licensing list for the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. This follows a visit by FBI Director Kash Patel to China on Friday. Starting on Monday, companies exporting substances on this list will now require permits. The move follows trade talks between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping at the South Korea summit last month. Trump agreed to cut tariffs on Chinese imports tied to fentanyl, dropping them from 20% to 10%. In return, Xi pledged to crack down on fentanyl, buy more U.S. soybeans, and paused plans to restrict certain rare earth exports to the U.S. Those minerals are critical for everything from defense systems to everyday electronics. Before Beijing's new policies took effect, FBI Director Kash Patel made a quiet trip to China on Friday. He met with officials there to speak on fentanyl-related issues. According to Reuters, Patel spent about a day in China, but the visit wasn't announced by either Washington or Beijing. When asked about it, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said he wasn't aware of Patel's trip. China's Public Security Ministry and the U.S. Embassy in Beijing also declined to comment. And joining us to unpack FBI Director Kash Patel's secret trip to China and whether China will follow through on curbing fentanyl is Casey Fleming. He's the CEO of business warfare and counterintelligence company Black Ops Partners. Casey Fleming, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, China's foreign ministry spokesperson says he's not aware of Patel's trip to China last week. But first, is it rare for the head of the FBI to go to someplace like China?
Yes, it is rare. Typically, you would have the Secretary of State or someone out of State Department. That's their bailiwick, their realm of responsibility. It is quite odd to have a director of the FBI go over to a country like that. Now, however, our director of the FBI did go to London with MI5, their equivalent over in the UK. That was about 4 or 5 years ago, and they made the comment about economic espionage and the theft of IP and so on. But that's with a long-time ally. China, we don't have that relationship with China. In fact, China is actually the enemy. So it's very odd that the FBI director would go.
Now, China's Commerce Ministry did announce on Monday that the country will make adjustments to the catalog of drug-related precursor chemicals, and it will now require licenses to export certain chemicals to the United States, Canada, and Mexico. It also underscored that exporters shipping chemicals to certain high-risk countries like the United States could face criminal risks. What do you make of this? Why would China agree to do something like this?
Just staging. It's, if the CCP's mouth is moving, it's a lie. So what you'll see this happen for probably 90, 120 days, and then it'll ramp right back up. Don't forget, Trump did this before in his previous administration. They did it for about 90 days and they came back. The whole thing came back.
And as you pointed out, China does have a history of breaking promises or not keeping its word. So given that, what kind of pressure points did the U.S. have this time to kind of enforce this follow through by China on the issue of fentanyl?
Well, the threat is the tariffs, and the tariffs really do affect China because their economy is in the tank, and they need that revenue coming in, the counted, predictable revenue coming in from the United States and the West. But the way to really affect them is to hit them with tariffs, and at the same time, the double-edged sword is to reduce our exposure to China, which we should be doing anyway. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, China showed their hand with rare earth minerals. That is something that they've been planning for 30 years. They've been building that cornering the market on that for 30 years. And then they showed you your hand. They showed the hand to the United States, but the entire world. So anybody who thinks that they're a trading partner, on the surface, they're a trading partner, but they're an absolute enemy. And just looking at the rare earth incident as well.
What can, say, the average Joe on the street do now?
Well, your government has been handling it, but actually they haven't. It just keeps getting worse, and all of this keeps getting worse and worse. So what Americans can do, number one, stop buying products from China. Don't buy any technology, anything that plugs in, whether it's an appliance or a computer or what, or a USB cable or any app from China. They have a great firewall. None of our apps are allowed in China. Why are their apps allowed at our children, especially when children are building their brains, their values, their self-worth, and so on? We think fentanyl is devastating. How about destroying somebody's mind so they're just a zombie and ready for taking over and ready for your enemy's narrative to take them over and say, these guys are great. I hate America. I hate the United States. I hate our rights. I hate everything, our government. I hate everything about America. So why not? Let's try these new guys coming in. We haven't tried it before. And incidentally, just from a historical perspective, there has been no instance of Marxism, socialism, or communism ever being successul in history.
Well, Casey Fleming, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
A Chinese diplomat in Japan threatened to cut off the head of Japan's prime minister. The threat comes after Sanae Takaichi made comments on Taiwan-related issues. The Japanese government strongly protested the diplomat's remarks, calling them extremely inappropriate. The Chinese envoy deleted his terror-like post on X shortly afterward.
Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had once warned that a Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency. Shinzo Abe's remarks suggest that a Chinese attack on Taiwan would directly affect Japan's security. The new Prime Minister Takaichi re-emphasized this statement with more clarity on Friday. She said that a Taiwan emergency could pose a threat to Japan's existence, implying that Japan could take military action if China attacks Taiwan. Shui Jian, the Chinese consul general in Osaka, posted on X on Friday saying, quote, "The filthy head that recklessly sticks itself in must be cut off without a moment's hesitation." On Monday, Japan's chief cabinet secretary called the post extremely inappropriate and urged Beijing to take appropriate action. However, the Chinese Foreign Ministry defended the envoy's remarks during his Monday press briefing. Although Shui Jian deleted the terror-like post, he continues posting similar messages on X. These included posts saying, quote, "A Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency. It's a fatal path that some stupid Japanese politicians are trying to take, and that dialogue is no longer possible." The U.S. ambassador to Japan weighed in, saying the Chinese diplomat had threatened Japan's prime minister and that Beijing's behavior once again shows misconduct. Prime Minister Takaichi says she has no intention of withdrawing her remarks on Taiwan. A major Chinese offensive against Taiwan would disrupt global supply chains, which rely on the Taiwan Strait for 99% of trade, while also strengthening China's military position in the region. Takaichi, who took office last month, is the first Japanese prime minister to outline a specific scenario that could justify military intervention.
China's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier, the Fujian, has officially been commissioned. It's China's third carrier, marking a major step in Beijing's push to compete with Washington's naval power. It's also the first to use electromagnetic catapults, or EMALs. The system allows the carrier to launch multiple aircraft types and allows jets to take off with heavier weapons and fuel loads, giving them greater strike range. Right now, the only other carrier in the world with that capability is the U.S. Navy's USS Gerald R. Ford. Even with its new technology, former U.S. Navy officers told CNN the Fujian's flight operations could be just 60% as fast as older U.S. carriers. They say that's largely due to the Chinese carrier's flight deck layout. Meanwhile, China's already working on its next carrier. It's expected to use the same EMAL technology and be nuclear-powered this time. Worth noting, the name of the new carrier, Fujian, is the same as the Chinese province closest to Taiwan. Stealing U.S. technology to start a business in China. A federal jury has convicted Chinese scientist Ji Wang for stealing technology from a U.S. government-funded project. Prosecutors say Wang also pitched the stolen tech to Chinese authorities, saying it had military applications. In the early 2000s, Wang was the lead scientist on an $11 million project funded by the Pentagon. The project aims to develop laser fibers that can be used to combat drone threats. After stealing the technology, Wang tried to set up a fiber laser business in China. The DOJ said Wang visited China to pitch the stolen technology to Chinese authorities to secure funding for his business. Wang said it could be used in tanks and that its military use could decide victory or defeat. He started stealing the technology after applying for China's 1,000 Talent Plan award. Under the program, Beijing tempts top scholars to hand over their know-how to China. Wang faces up to 25 years in prison. His lawyer says they'll appeal the convictions. President Trump has pardoned a former NYPD sergeant. The officer, Michael McMahon, was previously convicted for stalking a New Jersey family on behalf of Chinese authorities. He was sentenced to 18 months behind bars for taking part in a campaign to pressure a New Jersey resident to return to China. Several Chinese officials oversaw the operation, while McMahon was brought in as a private investigator. He says he was unaware he was working for the Chinese Communist regime. In a statement, a White House official said McMahon earned 75 commendations while serving the NYPD. The official also says the investigation of McMahon and his trial had issues, and that key witnesses allegedly fabricated incidents. Coming up, China's exports in October has fallen for the first time in almost 2 years. We take a closer look at the state of the world's second largest economy. A historic address at the European Parliament, Taiwan's vice president called on democratic nations to unite against communist China over the weekend. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. An unexpected decline. China's exports in October fell for the first time in almost 2 years. Exports are one of the pillars propping the world's second largest economy. This comes as domestic consumption remains weak, the real estate market struggles, and unemployment remains high. According to customs data, China's exports to the U.S. dropped 25% in October from the same month a year earlier. Chinese shipments to the U.S. dropped over the course of the first 10 months this year. But its exports to Southeast Asian countries, the European Union, and Africa surged. That's as Chinese exporters try to find alternatives to the U.S. market. However, no other country comes close to matching the U.S. market. China sells over $400 billion worth of goods to the U.S. Chief economist at Bain's Capital Management, Zhang Zhiwei, says it appears the rush to ship goods to the U.S. ahead of tariff hikes subsided in October. He added that China may need to rely more on domestic demands now that exports have lost steam. The regime has recently listed increasing domestic consumption as one of the top goals within the next 5 years. China's Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, fell to 49%, indicating that the country's manufacturing and service sector has been shrinking. PMI is an economic indicator that measures the health of the manufacturing and service sector. A Singaporean economist says the truce in U.S.-China trade war would stabilize the outlook in the near term, but he notes that both countries will try to reduce their dependence on one another, and the U.S. would see even less exports from China. Tesla sales in China plunging to their lowest in 3 years. That's as consumer spending remains weak and domestic markets stay highly competitive. Tesla sales in China fell more than 35% in October compared to a year ago. The company's share of China's EV market also shrank to just over 3%, its lowest in more than 3 years. China is the world's largest auto market and Tesla's second largest, right after the U.S. Tesla's weak performance in China follows poor sales last month in European markets like Germany and Spain. Meanwhile, competition in China's EV market remains fierce. Tesla's rival Xiaomi posted record sales last month, selling more than 48,000 units. Taiwan's vice president delivered a historic address at the European Parliament over the weekend. She called for unity among democratic nations facing pressure from Beijing. Dozens of legislators from different countries attended the Interparliamentary Alliance on China conference. They gathered to discuss how democratic governments can join forces to respond to Beijing's growing threats. U.S. lawmakers say the Chinese Communist Party is using trade and infrastructure vulnerabilities to influence Washington's policies. NTD's international correspondent David Ives reports from Brussels.
Are we seeing a new phase of communism today? That was the opening question at this IPAC conference, and it set the tones for the debates as 50 legislators from 30 countries outlined the challenges their country faces from the Chinese Communist Party. The event was highlighted by the surprise visit of Taiwan's Vice President Xiao Bikim. Attending IPAC's plenary session alongside Taiwan's foreign minister, her speech marked the first ever address by a senior member of the Taiwanese government in a major foreign democratic legislature.
And I stand here not only as a representative of a government, but as a voice for a society deeply committed to the same ideals that animate the parliaments of democracy around the world.
She urged that amid growing geopolitical tensions, 23 million Taiwanese people cannot be excluded from a conversation about protecting freedom, human dignity and democracy in today's world. She said she hopes Taiwan will not only survive but continue to uphold democratic values alongside its allies.
We have already increased our national defense and also try to let the whole world know that actually the peace and security in Taiwan's Strait is not only for Taiwan's democracy, but also for the global economic prosperity. It's our shared interest and our shared value to maintain the peace and security in Taiwan's Strait.
Lawmakers also highlighted other forms of threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Nebraska State Senator Elliot Bostard shared concern about possible interference from the People's Republic of China.
Certainly, we're currently in the middle of a significant amount of economic pressures where through trade, leverage is being used across the Pacific to exercise certain political results. And so, of course, within that framework, real people get caught in the middle. And so if you're like me, you're from a place like Nebraska, global trade is incredibly important for the future of our state. And so it's important that we are resilient and that we are adequately preparing and also protecting ourselves from more direct threats, whether it's to our telecommunications infrastructure, our water infrastructure, and our power infrastructure. We've identified several vulnerabilities that are being actively exploited, being actively threatened by adversaries to the United States, including by the PRC.
He added that while the federal administration is addressing these issues, local governments often lack the resources and authority to respond effectively. David Ives, NTD News, Brussels.
According to Professor Akira Igata of Tokyo University, Taiwan produces 92% of the world's advanced semiconductor chips. A major crisis in that region could trigger a global economic shock worth trillions. By comparison, the 2008 housing bubble cost the global economy around $2 trillion. Igata says a shipping disruption from a potential Chinese blockade of Taiwan could reach up to $10 trillion. President Trump announced Anti-Communism Week on Friday. In a proclamation, he said more than 100 million lives have been taken by communist regimes. He had a quote, "For more than a century, communism has brought nothing but ruin. Wherever it spreads, it silences dissent, punishes beliefs, and demands that generations kneel before the power of the state instead of standing for freedom." And in Atlanta, Georgia, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation held its Roll Call of Nations ceremony on Friday, honoring more than 100 million victims of communist regimes worldwide. Let's take a look.
November 7th is National Day for the Victims of Communism. It marks the date of the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, which initiated the spread of communist regimes. On the 108th anniversary of that day, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation held its Roll Call of Nations ceremony in Atlanta, Georgia.
This event commemorates the real flesh and blood families, individuals, people murdered by communism in the past. And at the same token, we are bearing witness that the crimes of communism are not over. They happen in places like China and North Korea and Cuba to this very day.
The event honors over 100 million lives crushed by communist regimes worldwide, featuring speeches from survivors and descendants. Dr. Eric Patterson is the president and CEO of the foundation.
It uses its guns and tanks and walls to keep its own people in, to repress its own people.
Jose Perez is a Cuban refugee and retired economist. He fled the country at age 12 in 1962. As a child, he witnessed televised execution under Fidel Castro's regime.
And he came in, Castro, and he said, that one should be guilty, that one is guilty. Then they set up kangaroo courts, and they condemned him, and they shot him. This little kid watched it on TV, and we saw these people just rolled over and fall dead. You go, that doesn't leave your mind as a young man.
Perez served on the Board of Regents for the University System of Georgia. He advocated for the state to establish a curriculum that teaches about communism's evils at the state level, which has now been implemented. Dr. Patterson also addressed the brutal persecution against Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. The spiritual group is under severe repression by the communist regime in China.
It's been 26 years now since the terrible repression began in 1999 against Falun Dafa. And this is one of the most insidious recent persecutions, with the well-documented by our organization and others, organ harvesting, and many, many other crimes against those people.
Andrea Lauer Rice is the president of the Hungarian American Coalition. Her family was part of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution.
Every family member was involved in fighting for their freedom in some way.
She also says the recent New York City election presents an opportunity to teach young people more about communism.
Instead of just being horrified by the New York election results, we can look at it as an opportunity to teach the next generation that this ideology is an anathema to our American values.
Dr. Patterson said he hopes the event will raise awareness about the crimes of communism and help the next generation take a firm stand against today's communists.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.